Hello, World History students. Welcome to the last section of the Age of Empires unit. This one is on nation building in Latin America. So, the nations that get built out of the Spanish Empire are basically in green and blue on this map here. And so, these are territories controlled by Portugal or Spain in what is now known as Latin America. The Latin comes from the fact that Portuguese and Spanish, and also French, incidentally, are Romance languages, meaning they come from Rome, which was a empire that spoke Latin. So hence Latin America. The focus question for this for this section, is how the Atlantic revolutions, which are the American, French, and Haitian revolutions, kind of the first wave of the revolutions for liberty, inspire political changes in Latin America. So the Creoles and Peninsulares are the two top economic classes in Latin America. This image that my face here is covering the bottom right hand corner of is basically the racial hierarchy in the Spanish Empire. The Portuguese had a similar system. It's called the casta system. And basically, any sort of mixture of ethnic groups had a name, had a social position, and at the very top were the European born Spaniards and Portuguese, known as the Peninsulares. Right below them are the ethnically European but colonially born Creoles, who basically were literate enough and wealthy enough to see the benefits of an American or French style revolution. The French Revolution, in particular, had a direct impact by weakening the power of the Spanish and the Portuguese monarchies, and it gave the impetus to a series of nationalistic revolts led by Creoles, who saw themselves as being American and not Portuguese or Spanish. So basically, economic inequality gives power to national revolution, nationalism, and in opposition to Spanish and Portuguese imperialism. The first revolution in Latin America after the Haitian Revolution is the Mexican War for Independence, which began on September 16th, 1810, led by a mestizo priest named Miguel Hidalgo, mestizo meaning of mixed native and European origins, which is the heritage of most of the folk in Mexico. His revolution is a peasant revolt. They're not very well armed. He's not a general. He's just a person who believes in, frankly, equality and freedom. And his revolution is crushed. But nonetheless, even though he is seen as kind of the leader of the Mexican independence movement, and that day is Mexican Independence Day, the very forces that crushed Hidalgo's peasant army, which were Creole and Peninsulare, were so afraid of what this mestizo revolt meant that they declared independence, in the midst of an ongoing peasant revolt in 1817, and basically used this independence declaration to suppress dissent amongst the peasants, incorporate peasant armies into their revolting armies, and create a state that left them still in charge. The gentleman in this image, his name is Guiaro, and he is one of those peasant leaders who joins up with the Creoles and the Peninsulares and kind of brings mestizo armies into the fold, helping Mexico win its independence in 1821. Latin America quickly in relative speaking terms, becomes independent, basically, again, because of that instability from the French Revolution in Europe, loosening the Spanish and Portuguese yoke. There are two men that are conceived of or labeled as the liberators of South America on a regular basis, Simon Bolivar of Venezuela and Jose de San Martin of Argentina. So Venezuela, is up here. Argentina is down here, so northern and southern South America. Both are Creole, so they're of European extraction, and they're both very well connected with their colonial militaries. So a little bit different than the Mexican story. 1810, they both relieve revolts. Same year, the Mexican Revolution begins. And Bolivar basically is able to liberate the three northern countries here in South America. You've got Venezuela, Colombia, and Uruguay. Ecuador. And then San Martin liberates Argentina and does this incredible, epic journey over the Andes Mountains to go liberate Chile the next year. So the Battle of Chacabuco occurs after San Martin's army crosses over the Andes Mountains and which are 2 miles tall. So that is more than 10,000, more than 11,000 feet. 2/3 of the animals die during the trip, the pack animals, so the mules and the horses, and soldiers literally suffocated from lack of oxygen on this journey to go capture the capital of Chile, Santiago. By 1824, Peru, Uruguay, Paraguay, Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, Bolivia, and Chile had all been liberated by Bolivar and San Martin. The last states in Latin America that, beyond some of these ones owned by the Dutch and the British and northern South America that's liberated is the Captain Generalcy of Guatemala, which basically consists of the modern states of Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. And that state divides into those nations I just mentioned as a result of a civil war. The Peru, modern day Peru, is basically captured by both Bolivar and San Martin in 1821 as their two armies kind of converge. The Portuguese monarchy, looking around them and kind of seeing which way the wind is blowing, effectively allows the Declaration of Independence from the Creoles and Peninsulares in Brazil to go uncontested. And so by 1829, all of South America is largely free of Spanish and Portuguese rule. So new imperialism, which we talked about in the first section of this unit, helps lead to persistent inequality in Latin America. So the new imperialism is effectively industrialized imperialism, which is what this is a painting of. You've got a railroad running through a bunch of crop fields. It's an extractive economy. So you have, in colonial Latin America, a pre-industrial extractive economy. Export gold and silver to Europe. With industrialization, now it's export gold and silver and crops, mostly crops, plantation crops, to the rest of the world. Initially, the trading relationships that are exploitative are with the Spanish and the Portuguese, but with independence, the British and the Americans come in and end up basically protecting these newly independent countries in a sense because they can get the resources they want from them. The folks who end up running many of these nations are known as caudillos, which in English is usually translated to something like strongmen. They're effectively kind of military dictators who just kind of, the Spanish had a colonial military hierarchy. Revolution happens, the Spanish general is gone, and now it's a Creole, a native-born general in charge instead. One of the most famous ones that you may already remember from last year, 2 years ago, taking US 1, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. He was the dictator of Mexico, and he had the misfortune of trying to abolish slavery when there were thousands of Texans who, were not ethnic Americans, were American immigrants who basically revolt against his rule when, again, that slavery was trying to be abolished, resulting in Texas joining the United States. Benito Juarez, his successor, was what was known as a good caudillo, and he separated church and state. He did some mild land reform and kind of made Mexico a slightly more equal state, even though he maintained dictatorial power. So 90% of the population in the end had no land, actually 98 in some countries, which was the source of the majority of wealth. So yes, there's a train running through this field, but the people that live there can't afford to go on it because they don't even own the farmland. So really, this persistent inequality is extended because of the way resources are extracted from the environment in Latin America. So the United States, as Latin America's big brother, in a sense, big northern brother, has a huge impact on the history of these various nations. The United States, in the Spanish-American War, consumed the remnants of Spain's colonial empire, the few countries that hadn't been granted independence because of revolutions. That includes Cuba, which becomes a protectorate of the United States. It's independent, but only nominally. The U.S. has the right to basically tell them what to do at any point. The island of Puerto Rico, which is still part of the United States. The island of Guam in the Pacific, and the Philippine Islands, which is not part of Latin America, but part of the Latin world in a sense. The imperialist president Theodore Roosevelt engineers a revolution in the independent nation of Colombia to create the country of Panama, which immediately grants the United States a 10-mile wide strip in the center of the country to allow the U.S. to complete the French started Panama Canal. El Norte's companies, basically, which means the North's companies, invest heavily in Latin America banana republics, especially in the former Captain Generalcy of Guatemala, that's Central America. And these companies effectively run these countries like corporate branch offices. And so when the people in these countries exploited by U.S. companies revolt, then the U.S. military sends troops into the nations. So Cuba, Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, Panama, Colombia, Haiti, and Dominican Republic all have U.S. invasions after 1898. And many of these countries have multiple invasions to keep them under U.S. control. The last piece to this section is the Mexican Revolution of 1910, which finishes the work of Hidalgo that Hidalgo began 100 years before. The successor to the good Cadillo, Benito Juarez, Porfirio Diaz, did not continue the liberalization efforts that his predecessor did. 95% of Mexican families still did not own land, and of those who did own land, it's about 1,000 families. Francisco Madero pushes out Porfirio Diaz, but even though he's more popular and is seen as a more ethical figure, he's still ineffective at combating inequality. The gentleman over here, Emiliano Zapata, he leads a peasant rebellion, a mestizo rebellion, that seizes large landlords' estates and redistributes them to the starving poor. And this revolution sticks. It lasts 10 years. The U.S. tries to intervene to stop this land reform and giving of peasants land. But World War I prevents the U.S. from completely stopping this revolution. In 1917, the U.S., with some pressure, helps Mexico create a new constitution that's a compromise, but at least makes Mexico into a legitimate democracy. So the era of Cadillos in Mexico is over as of 1920. And that is that for nation building in Latin America.